Welcome back, everybody. We're diving headfirst today into the aftermath of the 2024 election. I don't know about you, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all.
Huh?
It was a crazy ride, and the results, well, they weren't exactly what many of us saw coming. We've got Donald Trump back in the White House with J.D. Vance as his VP.
It's a pretty stunning turn of events. Really makes you think. I think it says a lot about the anxieties and anger that are simmering beneath the surface of American society right now.
Yeah, this wasn't just about casting a vote for a particular candidate. It felt like this outpouring of frustration.
Yeah.
Think about that rally in Wisconsin just before the election. Trump was fuming about a microphone issue. He was ranting about how he was seething, even asking the crowd if they wanted to see him knock the hell out of people backstage. It was a very volatile atmosphere.
It's like that raw emotion. That's exactly what he tapped into. And he did it so effectively. There's a whole segment of the population, especially working class folks, who feel like the system has completely abandoned them. They're disillusioned, they're angry, and Trump basically became the voice for that rage.
Which is kind of ironic, isn't it? I mean, he's a billionaire. How does someone in his position become the champion of the working class?
I think it's all about perception. For decades, a lot of working class Americans have felt like the system is rigged against them. Globalization, stagnant wages, the cost of living just keeps going up. It creates this sense of hopelessness. And then Trump comes along and says, I see you, I hear you, I'm going to fight for you.
He promised to make America great again. And that nostalgia, that longing for a simpler past, it obviously resonated with a huge number of voters.
Absolutely. It's a powerful thing, nostalgia. It taps into this deep human need for security, for belonging, for the feeling that things were once better. When people feel like they're losing those things, they latch onto someone who promises to bring them back.
And we can't forget the whole focus on immigration. Border security was a major theme playing into this narrative of America under threat. Like, we need protection from outsiders.
It's a really effective tactic, especially when there's so much economic uncertainty. Create an us versus them mentality. Paint immigrants as the problem, and it diverts attention away from the more complicated systemic issues that are actually causing the economic anxiety in the first place.
Even with Biden and Harris, though, we heard criticism from the other side about their foreign policy, particularly when it came to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and our continued support for Israel.
Yeah, that's where you see these contrasting viewpoints colliding. Some people see Trump as this disruptor, someone who's shaking up the establishment, while others are really critical of his rhetoric and his policies. It depends who you ask, I guess.
And then you have Obama weighing in on black men who support Trump. He suggested it was a rejection of Kamala Harris. And that just opens up a whole other can of worms about race, gender, and political allegiances.
Yeah, it highlights how these choices aren't simple. There's a lot of complexity to it all. People's identities, their experiences are multifaceted, and their decisions are based on a whole bunch of different factors. It's dangerous to oversimplify it and reduce it down to just one issue.
So we've got this simmering anger, economic anxiety, distrust in the system. And then economist Dean Baker adds another layer to the analysis. He argues that the anger we see among Trump supporters is directly connected to specific policies that have benefited the wealthy at the expense of everyone else.
And that's such a crucial point, because it shifts the focus away from individual feelings and towards systemic issues. It's not just about people being angry, it's about understanding why. What are the policies that created these conditions in the first place? Baker argues that the root causes are deeply embedded in our economic system. And what's interesting is Baker doesn't let the Democrats off the hook either. He points out that while Republicans have often championed these policies favoring the wealthy, a lot of the folks who actually benefit from those policies and then try to justify them are actually Democrats.
It's like this weird disconnect,
Yeah.
right? It's not as simple as left versus right. It's more about a system that's rigged to benefit the elite regardless of which party is supposedly in control. And Baker doesn't sugarcoat the consequences either.
No, not at all. He argues that less educated workers, they've been getting the short end of the stick for decades. Even when the economy is supposedly doing well, their wages just haven't kept up with the cost of living. Their jobs are less secure, and meanwhile, the gap between them and the super rich, it just keeps getting wider.
It's really kind of heartbreaking when you think about it. It's not just about numbers and statistics. It's about human beings losing their dignity, feeling invisible, trapped in a system that seems designed to keep them down. And Baker connects that feeling of powerlessness directly back to those policies we were talking about.
Yeah, and he gets really specific, too. He talks about trade deals that have shipped manufacturing jobs overseas, leaving entire communities devastated. He also points to the decline of unions, which used to be this powerful force for workers to bargain for better wages and benefits.
So we're talking about real-world impacts here on everyday people. It's not some abstract economic theory. We're talking about families struggling to put food on the table, pay rent, afford healthcare.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to understand these policy decisions. If we're just focused on the anger, the divisive rhetoric, all the personality clashes, we miss the underlying causes of all this discontent.
Which brings us back to the election. Trump's back in the White House, J.D. Vance at his side. What do you think we can expect from this new administration? Is there any hope for real change, or are we just going to see more of the same?
Well, it's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, Trump's first term was certainly tumultuous, to say the least, both here in the U.S. and on the world stage. And his rhetoric during this campaign was even more inflammatory, if that's possible.
We heard a lot about draining the swamp, putting America first, making America great again. But what do those slogans actually translate to in terms of concrete policies?
It's tough to say for sure. But based on his past actions and what he said during the campaign, it's probably safe to assume we're going to see more of that economic nationalism, those protectionist trade policies, and that hardline stance on immigration. Whether any of that will actually address those underlying economic anxieties that fueled his victory, well, that remains to be seen.
What about the social issues? Abortion rights, LGBTQ plus rights, healthcare, all of that was front and center during the campaign. Can we see some major changes there?
It's definitely a possibility. Trump has already appointed several conservative judges to the Supreme Court. And with Vance's VP, it's likely there's going to be a push to undo a lot of the progress made on these issues in recent years. That could have huge consequences for millions of people.
So a lot of uncertainty, a lot at stake. Feels like we're at a pretty pivotal moment. Where do we go from here? How do we bridge all these divides and start addressing those deeper issues that have fueled so much of the anger and division?
That's the real question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think anyone has a clear answer. What is clear is that this election exposed some serious fault lines in our society. The level of distrust, the way we've become so polarized, the feeling that our institutions are failing us, it's worrying, to say the least.
But how do we even begin to address all that? It feels like everyone's so entrenched in their own camps. Just having a constructive conversation, let alone finding some common ground, seems almost impossible.
I think that's where the real work begins. It's about finding ways to bridge those divides, to really listen to each other, to try and understand where our differences come from. It won't be easy, but it's absolutely crucial if we want to move forward as a nation.
Feels like we're standing at a crossroads. This election, it's like it peeled back the layers and showed us all the raw nerves, all these deep divides and anxieties. Kind of hard to process, really, thinking about where we go from here.
It is a lot to unpack, but that's what we're trying to do here, right? Make sense of this whole tangled mess, figure out how we ended up here and what it means for the future.
Yeah, the future. That's what keeps spinning around in my head. All this anger, the economic fears, the policies, the appeal of Trump's message. What does it all add up to for the next 4 years for American democracy?
The big question, no doubt. And I don't think anyone has the answers, not really. But what we do know is that this election, it revealed some serious cracks in the foundation. This level of distrust, how polarized we are, the feeling that our institutions are failing us, it's pretty unsettling.
So how do we start to repair those cracks? Feels like we're all stuck in our own corners, Even having a civil conversation, let alone finding common ground, seems next to impossible.
Well, I think that's where the real work has to begin. We have to find a way to bridge those divides, really listen to each other, try to understand where the other side is coming from. It's not going to be easy. Those conversations are going to be tough, but it's the only way forward if we want to function as a nation.
And it's bigger than just politics, isn't it? It's about tackling those underlying issues, the economic and social problems that have fueled all this anger and alienation we've been talking about.
Exactly. We need to create a more just and equitable society. A society where everyone has a genuine chance to thrive, no matter their background, where they live, investing in things that make a real difference. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, creating good-paying jobs, making sure everyone benefits from a strong economy, not just those at the top.
It's a tall order, for sure. But it does feel like a tipping point. This election was a wake-up call, a reminder of how fragile our democracy is, how urgent it is to address these challenges.
Absolutely. And ultimately, it comes down to each of us. We all have a role to play. Stay informed, engage in those tough conversations, hold our leaders accountable, and work toward building a better future. It's not going to happen overnight, but it has to start somewhere.
Powerful stuff. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this deep dive into the 2024 election. It's been complex, it's been challenging, and at times, to be honest, a little unsettling. But as we move forward, let's remember the importance of critical thinking, empathy, and working toward a more just and equitable world for everyone. Thanks for listening.